Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something pretty wild. We're peeling back the layers of literature and history to reveal Sherlock Holmes as something much more than just a brilliant detective. We're talking about him as a literal defender of an entire empire. You know, we usually think of him solving these hyper-local London crimes, right? But historical sources and literary analysis show there's a much larger global defense mechanism at play here.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever wondered why the world's greatest detective was introduced to us as a drug user? The 1890 novel, The Sign of Four, famously opens with Holmes unpacking a hypodermic syringe and injecting himself with cocaine. I mean, it's a shocking opening, especially for a brilliant hero.
He calls it a 7% solution. It's this mild mixture of cocaine and water that he turns to whenever he lacks a challenging case. But to truly get this, we have to completely recontextualize his habit for the era. He wasn't written as a junkie. Actually, he was the ultimate man of modern science, utilizing what was then considered a cutting-edge technological breakthrough to keep his mind sharp.
See, in the 20th century, we came to understand cocaine as a dangerous, addictive narcotic. But back in the 1880s, it was viewed as an absolute miracle. In 1884, Carl Koller discovered its anesthetic properties, and it became this celebrated meteor of modern medicine. It was used in everything from cold cures to literally painless, high-fashion tattoos for the Victorian elite. So this modern, high-tech drug perfectly matched Holmes's hyper-rational, calculating machine persona. Section 1. A vulnerable British Empire. To understand his reliance on cutting-edge science, we really have to zoom out to the macro view. The Victorian era was expanding rapidly, but that expansion created deep biological and cultural vulnerabilities. It set the perfect stage for why a strictly scientific hero was so desperately needed to ease the public's mind. Looking at the timeline, we can see how historical trauma and terrifying new science essentially merged in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's worldview. In 1857, you have the Indian Mutiny, which was a massive colonial uprising. Then, jump to 1882, and bacteriologist Robert Koch discovers the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. So by the time The Sign of Four is published in 1890, these two very distinct terrors, colonial rebellion and microscopic pathogens, had completely intertwined in the cultural consciousness. You see, expanding the British borders actually left the empire totally porous and exposed. The list of imperial anxieties was just growing and growing. You had disgruntled colonials seeking revenge, exotic tropical diseases, all these fears fueled by primitive stereotypes of the era, and the infiltration of tainted colonial wealth. Soldiers and colonials were essentially bringing these foreign infections right back to the streets of London. Academic research by Laura Otis brilliantly connects these dots. Imperialism had rendered Europe incredibly vulnerable. And Doyle, who actually trained as a physician under the famous diagnostician Dr. Joseph Bell, viewed these societal threats identically to bacterial infections. He literally saw the empire as a physical body that was actively being invaded. Section 2. The Imperial Immune System. And that brings us to the climax of our investigation. Based on Laura Otis's academic thesis, we can reveal Holmes's true, hidden function in Victorian literature. He wasn't just a private eye, he was a biological defense mechanism. Holmes essentially acts as an imperial leukocyte. Now in biology, a leukocyte is a white blood cell that circulates in the blood and body fluids counteracting foreign substances and disease. Metaphorically, Holmes is that white blood cell, relentlessly circulating through London to defend the British body politic from these dangerous foreign invaders. The sources draw a fascinating direct parallel between Holmes uncovering criminals in London and the real-world scientist Robert Koch unveiling the microscopic bacteria that caused tuberculosis. For Conan Doyle, bacteriology was an imperialistic battle fought right on the home front. Holmes fights his battles exactly like Koch did, by unmasking tiny, hidden interlopers that have sneaked into the imperial city. Think about Holmes's famous quote from his first adventure. "There's the scarlet thread of murder running through the colorless skein of life, and our duty is to unravel it and isolate it and expose every inch of it." Medically speaking, this scarlet thread represents the arteries and capillaries of the British Empire's common circulation. Holmes is basically diagnosing the disease in the bloodstream to keep the societal body pure. Section 3. Isolating the foreign infection. Let's shift our focus to see how this incredible immune system theory perfectly maps onto the specific plot and characters of our focal novel, The Sign of Four. Any immune system relies entirely on one basic function, distinguishing the self from the other. This is perfectly mirrored in the novel. You have the British self, represented by Holmes as rational, scientific, cold, and possessing a superior intellect. And he is constantly battling the foreign other, which the Victorian text stereotyped as emotional, vengeful, mysterious, and primitive. Holmes's cold rationality is the precise antibody needed to fight off these threats creeping in from the colonies. We can see these literal germs infiltrating London in the characters of the book. You have Jonathan Small, a mutinous, vengeful British sergeant driven by colonial guilt. You have Tonga, an Andaman islander unfairly stereotyped by the era's racial prejudices as a violent primitive. And you have the Agra Treasure itself, tainted colonial wealth causing murder. All of these act as pathogens, driven by the aftermath of the 1857 Indian Mutiny. A brilliant recurring motif illustrates the East biting back. The exotic box housing the Agra Treasure functions just like the deadly biological weapon box used by the villain Culverton Smith in a later story. Both are dangerous boxes from the East, carrying deadly payloads. They represent the reader's simultaneous guilt and terrifying fear that the colonies they exploited would someday violate and infect them right back. Section 4. Restoring the Victorian Order. So, how does the great detective cure this societal sickness? Well, he successfully neutralizes the infections to bring temporary peace to the Victorian mind, and he does it through a very specific methodology. Holmes's method is essentially a three-step immune response: scrutinize the social body, identify the invasive other, and neutralize the threat to the empire. What's fascinating here is that Holmes actually learns from covert enemy tactics. Just as Doyle witnessed the Boers using camouflage in trenches in South Africa, Holmes uses disguise, cover, and adaptation to outwit and isolate the disease of crime. He literally turns the invaders' own tactics against them. This is why, when Dr. Watson turns to Holmes and says, "You are a benefactor of the race," it's not just some casual compliment. Watson's praise proves that Holmes is not just solving local puzzles for a quick thrill. He is actively upholding the biological and economic identity of his society, acting as the ultimate safeguard against the infiltration of foreign threats. Which leaves us with a provocative final thought as we wrap up this explainer. If Sherlock Holmes was the fictional immune system constructed to fight off the anxieties of the Victorian era, what modern heroes serve as the immune system for our own societal anxieties today? How might today's popular culture be secretly defending us from our own contemporary fears? Take a moment to reflect on that the next time you watch your favorite detective or superhero. Thanks for exploring with us, and keep learning.